The Iowa eviction notice. What is an eviction notice? Eviction notice, or notice to quit, is a letter sent by the landlord to the tenant notifying them that they should either take or stop a certain action or vacate the rented premises. Eviction notice can be of two types: conditional, when a tenant is given time to remedy the breach of the lease, or unconditional, when a landlord terminates the lease without any alternative options for a tenant. What should an eviction notice include? Information about the tenant and the landlord. The reason for sending the notice. The date by which the tenant should take or stop a certain action. The consequences of non-compliance. The date and way of notice delivery, and the landlord's signature in the form of certificate of service attached to the notice. How to evict a tenant in Iowa. Non-payment notice. There is no statutory grace period in the state of Iowa. This enables the landlord to send the notice to the tenant the very next day after the rent is due, unless otherwise stated in the lease. According to the Iowa legislature, a tenant failing to pay rent after it is due should get a 3-day notice to either pay or quit before a landlord can lawfully terminate the lease. A non-compliance notice. In case of other lease violations, the Iowa legislature allows the landlord to send the tenant a 7-day notice to correct the violation or quit. If the tenant fails to correct the issue, the landlord has to send the tenant an additional 3-day notice to quit. When it comes to illegal actions, the landlord is required to provide the tenant with a 3-day notice of termination and notice to quit. It also applies to cases when the tenant's guests or other inhabitants commit illegal acts even when the tenant themselves is not involved. What if the tenant fails to comply? If the tenant fails to pay rent due and associated fees or correct the violation, the landlord can file a complaint with the appropriate Iowa court. The filing fee will vary depending on the type of the court. For example, it is $95 if the case involves small claims. Then, the summons and complaint should be served on the tenant by any person who is not a part of the eviction case. The document should be sent no less than 3 days before the hearing date. If the tenant wants to contest an eviction, they should appear for the hearing. If they fail to do it, the court might make a judgment in favor of the landlord by default. If the landlord wins the case, the court will issue a writ of execution. In Iowa, such a court order means that the tenant must move out within 3 days after its issue, or the tenant will be forcibly evicted.